I'm Rich, Studio Paranormal, and today we are looking at this, the Line 6 DT50 2x12. So basically, this is a rock-up between Line 6's digital modelling technology and there's some valves in there as well. We've got two EL34s and two 12AX7s. So this is a little bit of a departure from what we've seen with Line 6 before, which has had a big focus obviously on the digital stuff. This is all about, vintage valve tone, and we're going to see today basically whether they've achieved that or not. So we've got 4 different voices within the amp, which are modelled on 4 classic amplifiers. There's what Line 6 call the classic American clean, British crunch, Class A chime, and modern high gain. So obviously in there we've got some, some vintage Fender tones. You've got a Vox AC30 style amp and some Marshall and Messer stuff as well. Let's have a look at the front panel and see what's on there. We've got 2 inputs, high and a low gain input. So I'm going through the low gain because I'm using a humbucker today. We've got 2 channels on the DT50. On those channels, what you'd expect to see really on a classic amp. We've got drive, bass, mid, treble, presence, reverb and volume. There's our channel selector there, I'll tell you more about that later. The same channel here. And then we have our voicing system, which can go from 1 to 4, and then pentode or triode, master volume, the class of the amp that we're using, and then just standby and power. Pretty simple really. So let's take a look around the back. First of all, obviously we've got a power input there, and you'll see that little signature, Reinhold Bognor. He's a custom amp maker, makes Bognor amps, and he's had an input into the design of the tube system within this amp. We've got the foot switch input, channel selection. Here we've got the L6 link, so basically you can plug a pod HD in there and actually store presets that will then change the tone and the settings on your amp. MIDI, you can have a MIDI foot switch controller as well, and effects loop, all pretty standard. And here, obviously we're going through a 16 ohm output. You can also have 4 ohm and 8 ohms. And there's a cabinet simulated XLR output, which if you're at home, you want to record really quietly, basically means you can plug straight into a desk or a preamp at home, and it apparently emulates the sound of the amp within a room. And one thing not to forget with this amp is we have 2 different speakers in here. We've got the Celestion Vintage 30 and the Celestion G12 H90. So essentially, what this means is that if you're miking the amp up like we are today and you're in a studio, it means you've got more of a range of tonal options, because obviously different speakers are going to have very slightly different sound. So it's quite a cool trick for using it in the studio as well as on stage. So let's talk about the look of the amp, because obviously if you want it to sound like a vintage amp, it's also got to look the part as well. On the top here we've got pretty rugged handle. I will say that this weighs about a ton though, so you will need a roadie or some sort of trolley to transport this on rather than lifting it with this. We actually used a crane to get it up on this. And then you've got this, which obviously that's pretty handy at first of all, but you're going to want to dial in your own tones after a while. And then, nice front panel, it all lights up, it all looks good on stage, nice little cloth thing here. It looks kind of like a vintage amp really, and just very, very slightly taller than an AC30. We're going to look at the front panel in a little bit more depth now, because there is actually quite a bit to it, even though it looks pretty simple. First of all, let's just talk about the class of the amplifiers. At the moment we're on Class A/B, which gives us a 50 watt output, and Class A gives us a 25 watt output. And what this means, basically for your classic amplifier buffs out there, is if you wanted to emulate a Vox AC30, which has a A/B amp output, then you can do that by selecting A or A/B. Or if you wanted to emulate something that just had a Class A output, then you can just switch it really easily and just get kind of
is that
closer.
like switching the valves into different kind of...
Yeah, it puts it into a slightly different setup basically. And yeah, obviously, like I said, on the Class A you've got a lower wattage output too. And then there's also a pentode and triode system, which is basically the amount of electrodes, I think, being used in the circuitry for the valves. I'm not going to pretend to really understand about that sort of stuff, but triode is obviously just 3, pentode is 5. That's just another way of emulating slightly closer the kind of sound that you want to get. I'm just going to basically take you through some of the 4 voices that are set up on the top panel here. The first one is classic American clean. Okay, so now we're going to look at the British crunch settings, and that's going to give you that sort of early Marshall sound, basically.
It's loud, isn't it?
It's really, really loud, yeah. And actually, at the moment, we are using this function here. If you pull out the master switch, it actually drops in volume, so you can still crank the amp with a bit of distortion and push the power amps. But you're actually just basically taking the volume down, so you'll be able to play hopefully at home and not annoy the neighbours.
What's this?
This is Class A chime, which is essentially that sort of Vox sound, the AC30. So I've dialed in the settings here, and I'm going to play a little bit of Tie Your Mother Down by Brian May, because I think that is the kind of tone that we're going to go for here. If you want a slightly higher gain tone that the AC30s are obviously well used for as well, then you just whack the drive up a bit. Okay, so let's take a look at the modern high gain as well. This is for that sort of really heavy rock, verging on metal tones now.
Voicing system's quite flexible then.
Yeah, it does give you a lot of flexibility, but you know, even better than that, with the voicings, which you know, there's those 4 there, you've actually got 16 different configurations you can have, because you can change the class of the amplifier, you can change from the pentode to the triode, pull out the master switch or whatever. And then what's really cool on this front panel as well is the channel switcher, because that's basically on a relay system, and right now we're on a very clean tone. And if I switch over to A, that's obviously a really heavy tone.
Oh, it reconfigures everything.
Yeah, it basically, so with a pod HD as well, you could essentially make a load of presets with that, and basically just, you know, throughout the gig, tap in the presets you want, and it would just change the tones and the settings on the amp for you. On this model, which is the 2x12, you're looking at a recommended retail price of £1,449.
Okay.
Which, you know,
so it's a lot of money. It's a serious amp.
It is a lot of money, but basically this is a really serious amp for someone who's gigging regularly, in my opinion. But you know, obviously, if you don't want to carry around something of this size, if maybe that's a little bit too much for you, there's the option of getting the 1x12, which is £1,199, I believe. To be honest, great looking, great sounding amp. You can use it if you're in a rock band, pop band, metal band, whatever. Really cool flexibility with the pentode, the triode system, the class of the amps. The fact that there's 2 speakers in the back, that's really cool. But you might be thinking, it's a bit pricey and it's really heavy. Like I said, you can go for the 1x12. But also, in terms of the price, this is a real great sounding amp. It's a vintage sounding amp, but for a modern guitarist, which is what I really like about it. If you've got a vintage amplifier, you can't just plug in a HD system and just, you know, dial in a few presets with your feet. But with this you can, and it sounds great.